Sorry about that. Trying a little something different here. All right, so welcome again. My name is Jamie Vibach, and I am the Will County Director with the Conservation Foundation. We're so glad to have you joining us today for our webinar on native plant design. First off, just so you know, everyone is muted, your cameras are off. This is a webinar format, so hopefully you can see and hear me, even though we can't see or hear you. So this webinar is going to be recorded for everyone to enjoy later. Our recorded webinars are on our YouTube channel, all the past ones that we've done, as well as going forward into the future. We're just going to keep putting them out there. If you have a question, please use the Q&A box. That'll let everybody see your question. It also makes it easier for us to find them all. We've got kind of a big room today, so the chat may be kind of flying. So hopefully you can see there. So questions can sometimes get lost in the chat, but we will make sure to answer them maybe a little bit as we go, but we will get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. For your safety, you should only be able to see what I post in chat, but just in case we miss a setting, please don't click links other than what we may post. I'll be monitoring the chat throughout this as well. On the TCF side of things, these webinars are offered free to the public, but we do encourage you to consider a donation or a membership. The Conservation Foundation's a 501c3 nonprofit, so we are supported by our members and donors. So the more people we have attending these webinars, the more it does cost us to run them. So at the end of the webinar, you're going to be taken to a page with a whole bunch of resources of things you might be interested in, including our virtual tip jar. So if you're enjoying these webinars, I do encourage you to donate to help keep us running. That also makes you a member, so you can enjoy our wide variety of members only things as well. Upcoming webinars, next week, I will be on vacation, so you will not get to see my lovely face. But you will get to see Jim and Jan, who will be doing our normal monthly conservation at home discussion. So Jim will be talking all about the Conservation at Home program, what you can do to be a member, what you can do to get your yard certified, all that kind of good stuff. And then on Thursday, Jan will be talking about what's blooming right now. So summer wildflowers and all the things that you might see if you, say, went for a walk right now out in a open space natural area here in the Chicago region. So there's going to be lots of pretty pictures, and I know Jan will do a great job. So I will miss you all, friends, for the next week, but enjoy next week's offerings with Jan and Jim. Without further ado, then I am going to turn this over to my friend Nancy Cinatl, who is a TCF staffer and knows all about landscape design. So Nancy, you want to go ahead and turn your microphone and your camera on?
Hi, Jamie. Hi, everyone.
There you are. Welcome to our Thursday webinar, and I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Okay, so I will share my screen now. And minimize that. What happened here? Okay, looks like we're set now. So welcome everyone. We're going to discuss some landscaping design ideas which you can apply to your native garden. And as Jamie said, my name is Nancy Cinatl. I am a staff member at the Conservation Foundation, which is in Naperville, Illinois. We have been around for 48 years, and our mission is to, have to move that so I can read the wording, my picture, to improve the health of our communities by preserving and restoring natural areas and open space, protecting rivers and watersheds, and promoting stewardship of our environment. We are proud to say that recently we were accredited by the Land Trust Accreditation Committee, which awards that to conservation organizations with the highest standards of excellence and permanence. We've been around a long time and plan to be for a good while longer. Our primary activity is in 4 counties in Illinois: DuPage, Kane, Kendall, and Will, extending into DeKalb, LaSalle, and Grundy. also. And as I said, we're in Naperville, Illinois. Our headquarters are on a organic farm. So to date, we've helped preserve about 35,000 acres of land, which was nearly 200 parcels. Helped people put 43 conservation easements on their properties, and worked, as I mentioned, in 7 counties. So there's a very good reason why we should be conserving open space. It improves the quality of our life in many ways. Open land along rivers and streams helps protect the water quality, which for many people is also their drinking water. Open space improves with the trees, improves our air quality. It helps preserve habitat for wildlife. And it also provides a place where people can get outside. And there's lots of information coming out these days about the importance of getting outside and the benefits that come from being in nature. And so we feel we have a responsibility to future generations to preserve some of this area. Today we're going to cover some basic design ideas. I have to say I'm not a designer by training, but I have an interest in it. I've had some classes in it, and I love to share what I know with people, both in terms of designing and about native plants. As Jamie mentioned, when we say native plants, we're referring to plants that live in our region. So some people are very particular. They don't want to put in plants that are outside of 50-mile radius. But for us, we are open to plants in the Midwest. And the whole reason to use native plants is because they've evolved here. They're used to our crazy weather in the Midwest, where sometimes it's very hot, sometimes it's very cold in the winter. It can be cold one day and hot the next day. We can have excessive rains, and then we have 3 weeks of drought. And these plants have figured out how to live in that environment. So for a garden to be most successful, you want to put in plants that are adapted to those kinds of conditions, both the sunlight and the water. So that's what helps to make it most successful. Here's a list of different ideas that we're going to cover. I don't know if some of you want to take notes on this, but I also will show the list at the end and reference it as we go along. We're going to start out talking about planting in layers, how you want to frame good views and hide bad views, connect areas with paths. It's important to consider the width of the flower bed, how wide you want it, and what you're going to put into it based on the width. Talk about the color themes, the benefits of mass plantings, how you need to, when you plant, you have to consider the mature height and width. A lot of people make that mistake of planting things too close because they're so little when we put them in. And then how many numbers of different plants do you want to put in? We'll talk about that, going for a balanced look. And then also the idea of creating a sense of enclosure in your sitting areas outside. Some people call it creating garden rooms. So I want to start with talking about planting in layers. This is a concept that not everybody thinks about, but we basically in woodlands or forests, you have 3 layers. You have the canopy layer, which are the big trees like the oak, the hickories, the black cherries, basswoods. And so they create a lot of shade and a lot of canopy. Under those, and usually on the edge of a woodland where there's more light, some shade, some sunlight, you get things like redbud, the dogwoods, the viburnums, wahoo, which is one of my favorites because of the seeds in the fall are so pretty, blue beech, hop hornbeam, wafer ash. And I'm giving these names because if you're interested, these are some things that you should be thinking about putting in your landscape. There are a lot of big trees in urban areas, but where we need to fill in the understory because that's an area where a lot of birds will nest. And the other thing is between the canopy layer and the understory layer, these trees provide a lot of food for the birds. I mean, basically in the spring, the birds are feeding caterpillars to their young. They can't feed them seeds. Seeds come in the fall, right? There are no seeds in the spring. And there would be some insects, but they seem to prefer caterpillars. And it takes a lot of caterpillars to raise a nest of young. So if you'll notice, if you go for a walk in the woods, you don't see trees defoliated by caterpillars. There's a balance between the bird, you know, a lot of caterpillars are produced, but then the birds eat them or feed them to their young. So it's all in balance, but we need to put these plants in. If you put in plants that are from another part of the country or the world, there may not be caterpillars that will eat those leaves. And so it's basically like a desert zone in terms of providing food. So we like to emphasize putting in the understory as well as the canopy. And then the herbaceous layer is pretty much everything else that's, you know, on the floor of the forest, and what we would be putting in our gardens, because that's where the most colorful plants are. And just along with this idea, if you have a wooded area in your backyard, especially in the Chicago area, we have so many species or plants that have been invaded. People have brought them over here from other parts of the world for good intention, but then they escaped into the wild. So we have buckthorn and honeysuckle. They both put out chemicals through their roots that inhibit the growth of other plants. So if you have either of those on your property, or maybe something else that's invasive in your area, it's very important to get those out. And then you'll be very surprised to see what seeds are in the soil and will pop up, good seeds. So when you're thinking about what you need to do in your garden, see, I don't know where any of you are in terms of you have a lot of gardens in, you're happy with it, or you're just starting from scratch. So I'm going to try to cover a little bit of everything. But one thing you want to be thinking about is, I have this, you know, utility thing that's, you know, an eyesore. What can I do to hide it? So you can get fake looking stones that you put over it. You can plant taller grasses around it and such, and it will just blend right in. No, it doesn't look exactly like a stone, but your eye doesn't stop there. It blends in, which is really nice. And then you can use trellis type materials to cover up your garbage cans or your air conditioning units, which better to use a trellis than plants around an air conditioning unit, because they need a free flow of air. And they don't want to be filled with leaves and such. And then if you have a good view, it's a great idea to think of ways to framing it. And it makes it inviting. If you have a door, like the one on the left, that gives you a peek into the garden area, that's very enchanting. And the one on the right, a trellis, which leads you down a path, which, you know, it's just a great way to frame it and makes it more interesting. And then in the middle, it's an example of how you can plant. So say you have a screen porch or a deck or something on the back of your house, and you have a nice view, but maybe it's just lawn out there. Think about putting in some trees and some shrubs and such that frame that, that view in a way that makes it like it's a picture. You can also use plants to disguise rain barrels. We encourage people to sell rain barrels. We have a supplier that we work with to help provide rain barrels. You can buy them through our website. But you know, they're not something that everybody wants to look at. So go ahead and use plants. This is looks like the Annabelle hydrangea here. It's very pretty, and I just want to say, while I'm thinking about it, that although we encourage people to put in natives, we're not absolute about it. There's some non-native things that are very pretty and are a great addition to a landscape. So feel free to put them in. Feel free to use the Annabelle. You can put the Annabelle in the front of your house in a prominent place, and then put the native variety, which is less showy, but oh boy, does it attract the pollinators. It's a wonderful plant to put in, the native hydrangea. Another idea to keep in mind when you're thinking about designing your garden is to connect areas with paths. it just also, as I mentioned before, sort of brings a feeling of enchantment to the view, and to sort of your mind says, oh, what's this path? I want to go down here and see what's what. Here's an example of a house. I would say a very cute little house, and you could have gotten to the front door from the driveway, but look at how charming it is to have a curved sidewalk or path from the public sidewalk. Notice how the planting in front of the porch is low, and what's been put in there doesn't look to me like anything that's going to overgrow and take over the view of the porch, which is very nicely painted. And then the taller shrubs are over to the left. And another thing you might note here is that the grass, because of the curved walk and such, the grass isn't just filling in the sort of the negative area. It's actually part of the design and looks very pretty too. Another thing that I noticed in this picture that I really liked is how the garden bed is extended across the path to the right side. And it's just a little section, but the eye kind of continues it. You know, it's sort of all one thing, even though the path cuts through. And the other benefit of having the garden extend that way is that you don't end up with a little tiny point of grass over there. In the Midwest, the grass is really, it's not the best place for it to be growing. Its natural area for growth is where it's cool and moist, and we get a lot of heat. If you want it to look this nice and green all the time, you have to water it, which uses up, for most of us, potable water, which is not a good thing. And it's harder to mow. So I thought that extending the flower bed across the path like that was a great idea. Here's another example of a path leading up to the front door. It's interesting because of the plants that are planted alongside it. I can just imagine myself stopping along the way to see what's what. I see a lot of prairie smoke in the front, which is such a neat prairie plant and a great thing to put along a sidewalk because it doesn't grow very big. Here are a couple of other illustrations. You can have a path out of the, use the grass, or use something like creeping thyme to create the path. And then on the left here, you see circles. These look like they're probably some kind of hardened material, but I've seen other pictures where the stepping stones are made out of wood. So a big tree comes down on your property, it can be cut up into sections that you then put down and turn into a path. It'll last quite a while and look charming. So it's also important to think about the size of what you want to put in and the space that you have. And one reason to do that is because it minimizes pruning in the future. I mean, all of us are familiar with houses that have overgrown evergreens like this. They end up being an eyesore. It's a pain in the neck to have to prune them 2 or 3 times a year. And if you don't get to it, they'll get taller than you are, and then you have to get a ladder out. I mean, it's just a pain. So there's nothing wrong with putting in these Spitzers on the right, but they need to be given the space to sprawl. So in terms of the size of flower beds, it depends on the space that you have, or what makes the most sense, whether they're 3 feet or 6 feet or 8 feet. But one benefit of making them wider than you might initially be thinking of doing is that it allows for different heights of plants and some depth to it. I thought this was a really attractive garden with different shrubs, different herbaceous plants, little trellis there, looks like some clematis vine on it. So a deeper flower bed allows you to do more with it, and then you would want to vary it. You wouldn't want everything at the same height. You want to vary the heights for just additional interest. I have some before and after shots of this house. The evergreens have not really totally overgrown the space, but you can see they're really not as attractive as maybe the homeowner or the landscaper was thinking when they first put it in. but it was redone, and now look at it. I think it's just absolutely charming. And I can see that there's some native plants in there. I think I see butterfly milkweed, among other things. It can be a mix of natives and non-natives, and not all the pictures I show you are going to have natives, because I'm trying to put the design ideas out there. And you know, it wasn't easy to find pictures that were just all of natives. So I'm trying to get the ideas out there, and as much as possible, I tried to pick pictures that had native plants in them too, so you could see that how they were used. So I thought this was very charming. What they've been put in does not look to me like it will get wildly overgrown. There may be a variegated dogwood in there. And one comment I have about that with the dogwoods, if they start getting too tall, rather than cutting them into a round ball, which is rather typical, it's much better, because they tend to sucker, is to just take out the tallest suckers from the base of the plant. And it will look looser and more natural, and you can keep the height down that way. Here's an example of, you know, on the left, where obviously the bushes they had in there, and it looks like, I can't tell whether they have a boxwood or whether that's ivy or something that's grown all over the place, but it was just overwhelming, that space. And then when you look on the right, it's a very charming house with the, you know, the porch there, and the smaller plants help show off the house. Now, I probably wouldn't have picked the plants that they put in there, but I wanted to show you what the smaller scale does in terms of making the house more appealing. So another thing to think about when you're putting in your garden is what kind of color theme you want to have. If you go with the blues and whites and pale pinks, it's going to be a more restful look. If you go with red and yellow, it'll be a very, you know, bold and bright look. And there isn't any reason why you can't have both of those in your garden, but mixing them all in the same spot probably isn't going to be as effective as grouping together the colors and if in one area. Maybe using some transition things. If it's a long flower bed and you want to kind of change it up, you can group them together, maybe use some colors to transition, or colors that are repeating, so that helps ties things together. If for a long flower bed, you might do, you might take a tent, let's say it's 30 or 40 or 50 feet. You might do the same pattern with the same colors every 10 feet, so it's the same pattern. Our minds like repetitive things. You see that in music. You'll have the verse, and then you'll have the chorus, and then the verse, and then you'll have the chorus. Our minds really like repetition like that. So let's look at some pictures. Here's a springtime view of two colors that go well together. It's the Virginia bluebells, which have such a pretty blue, and then celandine poppies, which are yellow. And then, you know, there's nothing wrong with having some daffodils in there too, which add to the beauty of the scene. Here's a garden that has, it looks like Monarda and some blazing star, and even some maybe native iris in there, all pretty much the same color. And to me, it's such a soothing and wonderful look. Also some sedges in there, I believe. Just a quick word about sedges, because I haven't really talked about it elsewhere, but for very wet areas, for areas where grass doesn't grow well, which would be very wet areas, or shady areas, there's a plant called a sedge, and there are many different sedges that will fill in for that and help fill in areas around plants the way you might want grass to do, and serve as a ground cover. In the summer, the combination of black-eyed Susans and butterfly milkweed are very attractive together. Or how about in the fall, where we have and there's several different black-eyed Susans, so I don't know exactly which one this is, but a black-eyed Susan, some fall asters, and then this is Gaillardia in the bright red. So very pretty to get those punches of bright red in there. Gaillardia is not native in our area of Illinois, but it is a Midwest, native to the Midwest. In certain areas, I think there's nothing wrong with pulling in something like that. And I mean, just to say, with the change in the climate that we're seeing, we're going to be seeing plants moving north and moving around. So as long as it makes sense, I think it's good to include them. So the idea of planting, mass planting, is very helpful because it makes a bigger impact. There's nothing wrong with the prairie look where it's sort of a scattering of flowers and such. Nothing wrong with that look, but in our home gardens, a lot of people think that's too messy. They don't want to put in native plants because native plants are so messy, but we can use natives and make them pretty. And one way to do that is to mass them together. This looks like, I don't know if it is, but it looks like prairie dropseed to me, which will grow in dry areas. So it works well along a wall and a sidewalk, which is probably hot and dry. Here's an example where in the foreground, you see quite a bit of another kind of blazing star. There's several blazing stars. Big clump of the black-eyed Susans. Beyond that is a Monarda, not native in Illinois, but I think that that color red is native maybe more in the northeast. In the background, I see Joe Pyeweed. And so because these are big clumps, they have quite an impact. I also see some evergreens. I can't tell for sure whether they're a low growing one or whether they're going to grow taller, but it's a good idea to put something like evergreens, boxwood, the right choice for the space. So you don't want it to, you know, if it's a blue spruce, it's going to grow up and take over the whole flower bed, which is fine if you want that in the long run. But if you're not, then pick the smaller versions they have out there that only grow to be 2 or 3 feet. But along those lines, in terms of the future, because I'm not sure I really addressed this on any of the other slides, I just want to say that sometimes you do want to put a tree in an area, and of course they're small, and there's no shade yet. So, you know, it's fine to plant for today. Gardens are kind of an experiment. They're ever changing. So you may plant it for a sunny area right now. And in the future, as the tree grows up and creates more shade, it will have to be adjusted. But you might as well plant for what the conditions are right now. Here's another one with the blazing star. If you're not familiar with it, it is just a butterfly magnet. So a great one to have in your garden. And this one shows the path weaving around different sizes of plants. Here's an example of before and after, the before on the left, and then what was done on the right. So expanded the flower bed quite a bit, took out a lot of grass. You can see that the plants are grouped together. Very pleasing to the eye. Little path has been put in. I think I can see the top of the bird bath still. And I'm sure that makes a very inviting place. Right now, would you be interested? I mean, in the before picture, would you be interested to go back and see, you know, visit the bird bath? But no, but I would think that with the updated version, that with the path going back there and such and a little bit of shade, it would be appealing. There might even be a little bench or something back there. So I wanted to talk about the plant spacing. When you put in plants, that you have to be thinking about what they're going to be at a mature level. There's nothing wrong with having those 2 big evergreens up near the house, but as you can see right there by the stairs. They have grown up and are covering the porch, so they're blocking the view from the porch, they're blocking the view from the windows. If those had been planted at the corners of the house and significantly away, I don't know how wide they would be normally. Maybe they would be 20 feet wide at full. So you would have to plant them 12 feet away from the house, or maybe even 15, because you really don't want to plant plants right up against the foundation. You want a little airflow behind them, and you want to be able to get behind them either to mulch or to weed or whatever. So planting them away from the house significantly is a very good idea, and then you can create a flower bed around them. This is an example of a flower bed right by the front door. So I liked how they put some boxwood at the back of the bed. It's evergreen, which is really nice. So you have something to look at all winter. Boxwood grows slowly. You can get varieties that are smaller or larger. So you pick the variety for the height you want. And they can be clipped tight into a ball, or they can be left looser. So I thought that was a good choice for this spot. And then you can see that the plants are grouped around it. And then there's one focal point in the middle. So I thought this was nicely done and illustrated what one could do up near the house. This is a large flower bed. I wanted to show you, if you want to take out a lot of lawn, here's what you can do. And I really liked it. The picture on the right shows some trees that are either small or they're understory trees. So they're never going to get too big. The nice thing about understory trees, putting them in, is that they provide shade, but they don't provide dense shade. So you can grow a lot of things that are normally sun-loving around understory trees because the shade, they're not big enough to shade a wide area, and the other plants get enough light, so they will grow well. And you can see a variety besides the trees. You can see that there are bushes in there, and there's some other things in there as ground covers. And it has nice fall color. So if you're ready to start a new flower bed or redo an area, you need to ask yourself some questions. So what kind of garden look do you want? Do you want it neat and tidy? Do you want it wild and free? Because that will determine the choices you make for plants, and also things like mulching. If you mulch a bed, which helps keep it look neat and tidy, with hardwood bark mulch, it's going to keep the weeds down, and it's also going to get your not allow your native plants that propagate by seed, grow from seed, they won't have a chance to spread. So that may be what you want. If you want to keep it neat and tidy, use the hardwood bark mulch. But if you want a garden that's a little more wild and free, then you would want to mulch with leaf litter. You can either mulch your leaves and put it down in the flower bed, or you can buy leaf mulch, and because that will give the plants the ability to reseed and spread around your garden. I mean, it's amazing how quickly they'll fill in an area if you let them. So here's a view neat and tidy, and I just wanted to point out the repeating pattern here of colors, the contrast between blue and yellow, which is a nice color combination. Also the pink roses with the purple is a really nice color combination. Even in this narrow space, you can create a beautiful flower bed, picking the right plants. It looks like it's a salvia and maybe a catmint. And I can't tell what the yellow is, but you could use a sedum here. Something that likes it hot and dry. And it's a little bit loose, but it's also, I would call it neat and tidy. Doesn't spill out on the sidewalk too much. softens the edge. Now here's a wild and free garden where things were put in particular spots, but then I'm sure that they've moved around quite a bit. And there's nothing wrong with this look if that's for you. Preparing the site, I wanted to mention that you don't have to herbicide your grass in order to expand a flower bed. You can use, and you don't have to dig out the grass, you can use cardboard and newspaper, you can put down a tarp. If you leave it for 2 or 3 weeks, the grass will die. You can plant right into it, right through it. You don't have to scrape it off or anything. So just wanted to point out that there's some sort of environmentally friendly ways of doing that in a way that doesn't break your back. So when you're figuring out what to plant, the conditions that it's going to be living in are what need to determine what you choose. Is it going to be sunny and wet, sunny and dry, shady and wet, shady and dry? I mean, ideally, we would all have properties that were, you know, sunny enough to have just about anything we wanted and moist enough to grow anything we wanted, but not too moist. But too often we have trouble areas. So if you have a drainage ditch in front of your property, which looks awful, hard to mow and such, you can put in water-loving plants and turn it into a garden. A couple of shrubs for sunny, wet areas would be meadowsweet on the left and elderberry on the right. I wanted to mention Queen of the Prairie. It's not really a shrub, but if it's happy in an area, it will take over. So if you have a fairly large area that's sunny and quite wet, and you don't mind if it spreads, try Queen of the Prairie. And people are amazed at when they take a wet area in their garden that's always been a problem. The grass doesn't grow well there, or whatever it is, and they start putting in these native plants. I mean, it just soaks it right up, and it's amazing. Plants soak up a lot of water. For a sunny and dry area, you might choose a combination like catmint and yarrow. Catmint is not native in this area, but it is very attractive for pollinators and the butterflies and other insects. Some shrubs for sunny areas that you might want to consider. And there are more than these. I'm just putting some out for illustration. Eastern Yahoo, which I mentioned before, that is our native burning bush. So it is not as invasive as the burning bush a lot of people have on their properties. The color in the fall is a little more subtle, but it's still very pretty, and it has lovely fruits. Serviceberry in the middle is very pretty in the spring, and actually the berries are edible. And then wild blue indigo is one of my favorites for urban landscape where you want a shrub that blooms a pretty color but is not too messy, because it grows to this nice size and just stays there. You need shrubs for sunny and dry areas. A dwarf honeysuckle, it's not a true honeysuckle, but that's its common name, shown on the left here, can grow in the sun or the shade. And right, this picture it has partial shade. So that's a good one, grows to be about waist high, I guess, and you can cut it down in the winter and it'll start all over. Fills in areas very nicely. And then New Jersey tea is another one that will grow in sunny, dry areas. If you have an area on your property that's shady and wet, what I recommend for shady areas is to basically plant it for the springtime. I mean, the woodlands are where the action is in the spring. So many spring flowers come up, bloom, produce their seeds, and then die back in the spring before the tree canopy has come out and shades them out. And there's just so many beautiful spring flowers. Some of them do last, their leaves do last through the summer. They can be used as ground cover. But rather than trying to plant things that aren't really going to be happy in an area like this, my recommendation is to just make it the focal area for the springtime. If there's a wet area, you can turn it into a little gravel waterbed. Maybe it'll have water all the time, maybe it won't, but it'll attract the wildlife when it does have water in there. The picture on the right has the woodland phlox blooming, which is so pretty. Later on in the summer, in a shady, wetter area, you can add these plants. Wingstem and the woodland sunflower are very tall, so you would probably want to put them a little bit farther back. Bellflower is a very pretty blue, also fairly tall, but it grows basically one stalk, so it doesn't take up a lot of space. And then white snakeroot is very versatile. It'll grow in the shade, it'll grow in partial shade, it'll grow in the sun, but I think it's happiest when it has more shade, and that will really fill in an area given a chance. The other thing I wanted to mention was in terms of shade, don't hesitate to limb up your trees. If you have a maple tree, for instance, which produces such heavy shade, go ahead and cut the limbs up higher to let more light in. Nothing wrong with doing that, because the more light you bring into an area, the more plants you can grow, the more plants you have in, the more it will soak up the water and be less of a problem that way. Here's some shrubs and understory trees for shady, wet areas. A nannyberry, which is a viburnum. Red twig dogwood, of course, is very pretty. It will look like the nannyberry during the growing season pretty much, but it has lovely red stems. Now the red stems will disappear as the plant gets older, so if you want to keep it shorter, as I mentioned before, you can cut the tallest stems off at the ground and keep it generating new stems that'll be bright red. And then on the right, not everybody knows about choke cherries, but it's a cherry family like the black cherry, but of a smaller stature. So good thing to have in a smaller garden. Here are some native herbaceous plants that do work as a ground cover, and you can use them for edging if you want a neater look. On the left is, oh, my mind's gone blank. Yeah, my mind's gone blank. Jamie, do you know what that is? A little white flower.
On the one on the left.
Yeah, the one on the left. I know what it is, but my mind's just gone blank.
Janet says Pachysandra.
No, definitely not Pachysandra. No.
Also, alyssum.
Not alyssum.
Sweet woodruff. Thank you for all these guesses in the chat.
I think sweet woodruff. I think it's sweet woodruff. Thank you guys. Thank you. Sweet woodruff. Yes. And you can see it makes a very nice border, filling in any spaces, between plants. And then bottom middle is bloodroot, top violets. A lot of people don't like violets because they will spread all over the place if you let them, but I think they're beautiful. So I've let them do that in my garden. And then ginger. You see ginger here on the right. It's just pretty versatile too, in terms it'll take it a little bit wetter and it'll also take it drier and makes a nice ground cover. So yep, shady and dry. The ginger again. And then columbine and ferns. There's some ferns that actually will take it dry. You have to read up on your plants. So those would work in the spring. And then in the fall, there's a zigzag goldenrod. I think elm leaf goldenrod also grows in the shade. And you can use the whitewood aster. And most asters like sunlight, but there's a whitewood aster. So there are some things that you can put in there to make it interesting later on in the season. And here I'm recommending, this picture is to illustrate that dappled shade is good if you can get that. If you limb up trees, plant understory trees instead of the great big ones. The more dappled shade you have, the more sunlight you have coming in, the more plants will grow there. And I don't know if this is an azalea in the middle of the picture, but I did want to mention, as I think I did earlier, that it's okay to bring in things that don't grow in our area. Azaleas would love a spot that it looks like there's a slight slope there. They like good drainage, so planting them on a slope in dappled shade, which should work really well for an azalea. And even in northern Illinois here, we are able to grow some of the azaleas. I have one that was put in, I don't know, 20 years ago at my house or more, and you know, it was just a little thing when it was put in, and now it's huge. It's almost overgrown the spot. So it was in the right spot for it, obviously. Also, you can see in this picture that people have used hosta. Obviously, we don't recommend people put in a lot of hosta, but it does serve its purpose in certain places. Here, I put this one in to show that you might have a densely wooded section, but if you expand the flower bed just a bit in front of it, you may be able to put some things in front of it where it gets just enough light. Purple cone flowers will take a little shade. Looks like there's some monarda in here, and maybe the red cardinal flower. So you can get a little bit of summer color when nothing's going on in the woodland. You want to aim for a balanced look, so rather than painting by numbers, you can plant by numbers. Use one plant for a focal point, and then use twos for symmetry. And then when you're planting in a flower bed, you want to group plants together in 3s or 5s or 7s, depends on how big your space is, of course. I know a lot of people come to our plant sales and they just buy one of this or one of that, and I wonder, well, where are they going to put it? And you have to think that these plants live in communities when they're in the wild. So I think they're much happier with others around them, and they don't want to be just one thing stuck in a flower bed all by itself. And the impact, we talked about the impact that you get from mass planting is so much better that it makes a whole lot more sense to put in more of something, maybe fewer things, but more of them to get a flower bed that you're happy with. This I thought was a delightful picture of a very balanced look. The house is balanced, and then the garden is balanced. Just everything that's on the left is on the right. And that may or may not be the look that you're going for, but I thought it was a great illustration of using twos and having a very balanced look. This is an illustration of the before on the left of how there were various things put in this area, probably not necessarily the wrong things, but it just doesn't really do anything for you when you look at it. Whereas on the right, when it was redone, there are 2 different paths here. The main path, which has a circle in the middle, kind of leads you down that way to a seat. It has the focal point, and this one is a grouping of plants. It looks like there might be a trellis there, so maybe they were put a clematis vine on it or something. So that's one way to do the focal point. But then you have the little path going off to the right, which, you know, when I look at it, I just think as a child, I would have been hopping from one stone to the next. It's very intriguing. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that by using paths, you divide up areas. It makes it more interesting to have plants sort of divided into different areas. This is an illustration too of one plant in the middle. This looks like a Japanese maple, which of course have such pretty red leaves. And then I wanted to point out how rocks have been used to kind of separate the areas. For the most part, things are clumped together in groups of 3. Another illustration of having the bushes near the house. They will probably grow up and hide some of that, where the hose is hooked up and the windows and such. But then the stones provide paths and also set aside various areas for grouping the plants. There's the center group, there's the one in the lower left, and it just works. This is a newer garden, so it hasn't grown up very much, but I like the way it was put together. And this is an example of a long flower bed, which in some ways is, it's not as neat and tidy as trimmed yew bushes, but it has a good flow to it. I can see sedum at both ends. You have repeated clumps of black-eyed Susans, and it works very well. And the rocks there, of course, are defining the flower bed. I probably would take the ivy off the house at the front door, but the flower bed in front I thought was great. We also want to create a sense of enclosure in our sitting areas outside, and you can do that with what in the landscaping industry is called hardscape, which is putting in, using bricks to create a sense of an area there. But you can do it in other ways, like this. I think people are just more comfortable when they have something around them, when you have a sense of being in a room, than just sort of sitting in the middle of a lawn. If you have a very small garden, maybe you're in a city setting, this is a way to create this sense of enclosure by putting in, I don't see any natives to Illinois here, but you can do something similar using our native plants by enclosing the whole area in plants. And I can imagine when you're sitting at this table with your friends or your family or whatever, you are not even thinking about the rest of the world. The plants would dim any outside noises, and it would be a great place. Here's an enclosure that's quite different, but it's created by having big plants around the area. And that could be a great place to sit and do some bird watching in the morning or at the end of the day when the birds tend to be busiest. And then in your wild and crazy, wild and free garden, you can take a cut, just the height of the plants and the density. The flower beds are fairly deep. You can take a couple of chairs out there when a friend comes over, and you can sit there and watch the butterflies coming and the goldfinch coming to eat the seeds off the purple coneflowers. So even in this garden, which isn't really designed for seating, you can have a sense of enclosure, which I think would be quite delightful. So if anybody, I just put this in again in case anybody was taking notes and wanted to capture something that they didn't catch at the beginning. Jamie?
Hey, I'm back.
You want to get some thumbs up or something? Should I leave this up longer or move on?
Do you have more, or are you ready to go to questions?
I have just a couple more slides.
Okay. How about we go to the slides and then
we come back to it if need be.
Yeah, then you can come back to this while we're answering questions.
Okay, sounds good. I just wanted to mention that at the Conservation Foundation, we started a program called Conservation at Home. If you're out of state, we can't help you, but but for our local area, what we do is that we'll consult with people, we'll come to their property. If they have problems with, too much shade, too much water, we'll give them ideas about where to put in a rain garden, what you can do to improve things, what native plants to put in, and then as they do more and more to create an environmentally friendly landscape, we have a sign so people can get certified, and people get very excited about getting their sign. It's good to put out if you have a garden that's a little more wild and free, and you put your sign out, people understand why it doesn't look like every other house on the every other garden on the block. So just wanted to put that out there. If you do live in Illinois, we have some partnerships with other conservation organizations that are implementing this in Cook County. They're doing it through the forest preserves. We have a partner up in Lake County, out near Rockford, and even in southern Illinois near St. Louis. If you have any questions about about our other partners or anything on this program today that I don't answer during the session, you can email me or give me a call. So I'm ready for questions, if there are any questions.
All right. So yeah, we've had quite a few questions come through. Some of them maybe were answered as you went along. We had some come in early that maybe got answered a little bit later, but we will try to get to as many questions as we can. We are coming up almost to 2 o'clock here, so we'll take questions for a little bit. And then if there are other questions that you're dying for answers for that we don't get to, please feel free to send us an email. Either me, it's my email on the emails you were sent about the webinar, or you can also email Nancy directly. So let's get to it. So from our Q&A box, what do you think of native cultivars? Are they still beneficial to the environment?
We prefer that you use the straight native, just because sometimes something is lost with the cultivars, and we don't know exactly what that might be. One thing we've noted is the purple coneflower cultivars do not necessarily live as long as the natives. So there are things like that that may have changed. So we recommend the natives, but that being said, if there's some good reason to go with a cultivar, so one of them that I'm thinking of is the Aster October Skies. It stays in a nice clump form, and I think it's still good for the pollinators, so that is something that I would recommend. So it kind of depends. If you can put the straight in, do, but if there's a good reason to use a cultivar, that's all right.
Yeah, I always talk about kind of like a lock and a key, with the flower being the lock and the pollinators being the key. Their mouth parts and other bits are specially adapted to be able to get the pollen and the nectar out of those flowers. But if you change the lock too much, the key no longer fits. So for a lot of these double flowers, even something as simple as changing the color, insects can see colors that humans can't. Right. So by changing the color, you're making it look completely different. Now the insect doesn't recognize it anymore. Just from a personal experience, I had a conservation at home member who put in, I think it was maybe turtle head, and they put in the native one, and then in a separate area of their yard, they had the cultivar one. The native one had some small holes in it, lots of evidence of insect activity, lots of insects all over it. By the way, those holes and things, that's what we want. We want insects to be using these plants. The cultivars had none of that. Very few pollinators using them, no little holes as evidence that caterpillars and things are eating it and it being a part of the ecosystem. So they also bloomed at different times, which is another thing that it's another change that can impact which insects are able to use it. So cultivars, I think, are one of those things that if you can stay away from them, it's generally considered better to go with the wild type.
Yeah.
Okay. What are some good native plants for flower bed edging and or pathway edging?
Well, I gave some example. I mean, the catmint for a sunny area, I think, is a good one. There's one called Walker's Low. So for starters, catmint is not a native. And Walker's Low would be some kind of cultivar, but they still attract pollinators. And so that works in a hot, sunny area. I gave some examples of shady areas. You can use ginger. You can use the sweet woodruff for edging there. I think it's fine to use sedums. In a sunny area, sedums, there are low sedums that would work as a good edging, and they attract a lot of pollinators.
Okay, sorry, I'm going through here looking at some of them. We had a couple of questions about hostas. So you mentioned you don't recommend hostas. I generally don't either. They're kind of biologically inert. Not a lot of pollinators use them. Nothing eats them. They're just kind of like, they're like grass. They're just sort of there. So native alternatives for hostas and a native alternative for a daylily, perhaps.
What was the last thing you said?
Native alternatives for hostas and daylilies.
Oh, daylilies. Oh, yes. The orange daylilies can really take over a place. Well, instead of hostas, I would use in place of mulch. Let's put it that way. Like if there's an area kind of at the back of a flower bed or some spot where not much is going to grow and you would just mulch it, you could put some hostas back there. But as Jamie said, they're kind of inert. They don't really add much except green. But having said that, I'm thinking of things like Jack in the Pulpit that has some nice big leaves. You know, you can use bloodroot. It's a little bit shorter. What?
I like wild ginger.
Wild ginger is shorter. I was trying to think of a little bit taller things. Solomon seal. The false Solomon seal, I think, will form colonies. So I'm trying to think of things that take up a little bit more space. I mean, the fact of the matter is that there aren't always exact substitutions.
And I think a lot's going to depend on the area too, whether if it's an area that's got a lot of water, I would plant something like blue flag iris instead of daylilies.
If it's sunny and wet,
some area that's sunny and wet, blue flag iris are gorgeous there. And you know, also for the daylilies, maybe just some grasses, and then throw some flowers like coreopsis or something like that in there to give you the flowers, while the grasses will still give you the height.
If it's very wet, you can use marsh marigolds with their pretty yellow flower in the spring and keep their leaves.
Yeah. Thoughts on landscape fabric?
Kind of a pain in the neck down the line when you want to change things up and plant something else there. That's my experience with it. I don't know that there are any, you know, I don't know that it's harmful, but what I like to do is to put down newspaper or cardboard. If you get boxes from Amazon or something like that, you can save those, put those down, you can put less mulch over it. And it keeps the weeds down and then disintegrates, of course. But then, you know, if you want to plant in that area later, it's a whole lot easier than having that fabric down.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. I've had a couple instances. The original owners of my house had lots of landscape fabric down.
Yeah.
And it's just been a nightmare removing all of it. So
and using rock for mulch. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's
another one.
That's tough to get out when you want to do something different there.
I don't know if you know this or not, but there were a couple of questions. I have 3 dogs that are mouthy and eat grasses and plants. Are most of these plants dog and pet safe?
That is definitely a concern.
Some of them are edible, but
I know white snakewort, for instance, is definitely poisonous. Yeah, I'm really not sure. You would have to research that.
Yeah, that's definitely something I would look into, somewhere like the ASPCA, or talk to your vet.
Yeah.
I know there are also like animal poison control numbers. I would definitely check with them if that's something that you're concerned about. Just because there was a question asking about the Conservation at Home program. It is free. to
Yep.
get a yard visit. If you want to get your yard certified, if you want to be certified, we do ask for a donation, recommended $50, just because that covers the cost of your sign, as well as your year's membership to the Conservation Foundation. So let's see, the back of my property tends to be the lowest area, and I'd be interested in planting wet-loving plants to help with drainage. Do you have templates for planting patterns?
I think we might on our website. And if you don't find them there, feel free to email Jamie or me, and we can send you some brochures that we have. Because we have that rain garden brochure, Jamie, that we could send.
Yes, yeah, and that's a really good one. I've emailed that to several places. So yeah, that's a good one too. Even our general conservation at home brochures got some general landscape plans in it, not necessarily specifically for wet, but you can substitute in whatever your conditions are. There are plants that fit that in there. Also going back to the conservation at home program, we're having a couple of questions about being outside of our native service area. Send me an email. If you're in Cook County, Indianapolis, wherever you are, send me an email and I can either get you to the right person, or if we don't have somebody, I can get you to a website that will put you in contact with a local land trust that might be able to help you with some ideas. Our Conservation at Home program is our program, and we do have some franchisees that we work with in other areas. We've got one in Michigan, we've got one out towards St. Louis, and then mostly in the Chicagoland region. But if you are outside of our area, you can always talk to your local land trust, and they at least may have some ideas or suggestions for you.
Just to be clear, even though this program today, this webinar today was about design, we don't really provide design services. I mean, we'll give you suggestions, and like we said, we have some brochures that you can use, but yeah, we don't provide design services.
Oh, and we do have a veterinarian on here. She says daylilies are fatal to cats. If you have cats or there are cats in the neighborhood, please don't plant lilies.
Good to know.
So thank you for that. Juan asks, what can be done to prepare the ground for planting natives? I saw the idea to place cardboard on the ground to get rid of the grass, which is a great idea. What else must be done to prepare the ground for native wildflower plantings?
I don't think much. I mean, you just need to be able to, you just don't want the grass growing in, or whatever other things, you know, we're growing in that area that you don't want. So yeah, once you can just plant in and be good to go. I mean, with a new garden, you're going to have to do some mulching, even if it's a little prairie plot and you want them to be able to reseed and such. So at the beginning, you'll definitely want to mulch, or you'll just have all the thistle seeds in the neighborhood landing there and growing up, and, you know, dandelions and all that. So you'll definitely want to mulch initially, but as the plants get bigger, you can kind of cut down on the mulching and use some, well, leaf mulch, you know, if you don't have to buy it and such, that's always good.
Okay. I understand it's best to spread native seeds in the fall for them to germinate in the spring. Can I spread seeds in my mulch and expect them to grow, or do I need to move the mulch to put the seeds in the dirt?
If you're talking about leaf mulch, I don't think it's a problem. And the seeds can be spread, yeah, in the fall or even January, February. If you think about it, in the woodlands or in the prairies, the seeds are drying and falling at the same time that the leaves are drying and falling. So, and the leaves actually decompose pretty quickly. So I don't think it's a problem.
And I think you need to check with where you're buying your seeds from first, because if the seeds have already been stratified, whether artificially stratified, that means put in the refrigerator or freezer to mimic the freeze-thaw cycle. If they've already been stratified, you can plant them anytime.
Yes, that's true.
So definitely something, like I know when I bought seeds from Prairie Moon, they actually send you planting instructions that tell you what to do with them, on how to either artificially stratify them in the refrigerator or when the best time to plant them is. So that may be one where just, follow the directions.
Yeah, and there's some plants like Echinacea, the purple coneflower, that really doesn't need any extra, any preparation.
Okay. I'm going through here. So again, if you want information on who to talk to, send me an email and I will get you to the right person. It's much easier than me rattling off all the different ones here. So let's see, best ways to organically get rid of wild strawberries and ground cover that spreads. We've tried organic methods and they don't work. I agree.
Well, I would let the wild strawberries stay myself, but I don't know what kind of, what kind of garden you're trying to have.
Unless it's mock strawberries. Mock strawberry, they may be meaning mock strawberries, and those are not native and
okay.
super crazy, because I've got them in my yard too.
I mean, there are some things, obviously we don't recommend herbiciding unless absolutely necessary, but there are some things that really you cannot get rid of. Creeping Charlie being one of them.
Vinca.
With Vinca, yeah, I mean, you can pull it out as much as possible and then herbicide what's left, but I mean, they're really just pretty impossible. So selective herbiciding, we do.
So yeah, making sure that you use the correct herbicide, because there are multiple types of herbicides out there and some work better on different plants than others. And then making sure that when you're applying it correctly and in a targeted manner, not just like broadcast spraying glyphosate everywhere.
Yeah, and not on a windy day when it's going to blow onto other things that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. We're concerned to mulch because of termites. Should we still mulch?
Termites?
Yeah.
I haven't heard of that ever being
a
problem. I mean, you really want the termites eating the wood outside your house, not your house. So to some extent, it might be good to provide food for them that's not your house. I don't know. We don't really have a problem with termites in our area, so I don't know a lot about it.
Yeah, I'm not sure where Corinne is from, but yeah, termites generally aren't a problem in this area. It gets a little too cold. If it's carpenter ants, the good news is carpenter ants aren't causing the problem. They're just a symptom of a problem that's already there.
Yes.
So I wouldn't worry too much about that. How can I deter the chipmunk, squirrels, and voles from eating my plants?
That's tricky. I know here on our property, we have not had any luck having the blazing stars because the voles eat the corns. I don't know. I mean, the more you plant for wildlife, if you ever seen the movie The Biggest Little Farm, the more you plant for wildlife, the more you'll get predators coming in that will take care of the population for you. So, the birds may come along. I mean, I guess another reason to plant more rather than less of one thing would be so that you can afford to lose a few. I don't know. Gardening is always an experiment, and it's trial and error. So I don't have an exact answer for you.
Okay. Barb says, I'm looking to replace my lawn. What kinds of grass would you recommend? And I'm going to do a quick plug. I am scheduling the July programs, and we are going to do a specific program on replacing lawn with natives. Not necessarily just grass, but Eric Anderson, who is a wonderful restorationist, is going to be talking about pollinator plants as well as different types of native plants that you can swap out your grass for.
Do you have a date for that yet?
I'm still working with him on that. I believe it's going to be in early July, though. We'll have it on the events page on our website when everything is settled.
The only thing that comes to my mind is that buffalo grass, which isn't really native in this area, but it is, in the Midwest, can work. And I think you mow it twice a year if you want to, want to keep it looking a little bit neater.
Okay. Sorry, I'm flipping around here. Can Jacob's ladder work as a border plant?
Well, I think it depends on the conditions, but yeah, in a at least partly shady area. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's kind of a delicate
Yeah, it's a little bit
thing
delicate,
too.
but
So I don't know if I would want it on the border, just because things on the border are more likely to get stepped on. But as far as conditions work, I don't see why it wouldn't work. How often should I water my newly planted natives, pint size?
that's a good question. So natives do need to be tended the first year. It usually takes about 3 years for them to really get established. So if we're not getting adequate rain, you do need to water them just like you'd water anything else that's new that you put in. The second year, they probably don't need weekly watering, but you would want to water them during a drought period. And then by the third year, they're probably fine.
Okay. I know there are native plant sales in the spring. Where's a good source for native plants in the summer?
That's something we're trying to address. I don't know where you are, but it's worth asking at local nurseries. Sometimes I know there's one in our area, the growing place will order native plants. So they may not have what you want if you just go there, but if you, you can pre-order.
And always ask.
Yeah.
Having a good conversation with the person that you're buying your plants from is really premium. I always recommend Possibility Place and Prairie Moon and Prairie Nursery, just because all three of them ship. So no matter where you are in the country, they will ship plants to you. And they are Midwest-based native plants. So, but if you're finding them elsewhere, just talk. And the big question to ask is, are the plants treated? I always advise people to not buy native plants from big box stores, because even if they tell you they don't treat their plants, I guarantee you the nursery where they get their plants from does treat them. People want big, beautiful, whole looking plants. And the only way to get that is to treat them with herbicides. So now you're putting in plants to bring in pollinators so that they can eat the plants that are coated in things that are going to kill them. So have a conversation, talk to the growers of the plants, not necessarily just the people who sell them, but find out if they're being treated. Prairie Moon, and Possibility Place are the three, and Midwest too, I think, are the ones that I know of that grow their plants and aren't treating them with tons of insecticides.
Right. Midwest is a wholesaler, so you can't buy directly from them. But yes, they have native plants that are not treated, and local nurseries can probably get them from there. The other thing, I wanted to say, along with Jamie, that buying things from big box stores is not necessarily a good idea, because they don't always check their plants very carefully, and there can be pathogens and insects and such that are coming in on those plants. I don't remember exactly which ones, but it's an issue. Yeah. So not the best place to buy your plants.
Exactly. Do you have recommendations on how to move natives? I have some forbs that are just in the wrong spots now.
Well, it kind of depends on the native. If you're talking about prairie plants with deep roots, good luck. Or you might be able to move them because they have a good root system, but you might have them keep coming back in the same spot. Woodland plants I think would do better, but even the echinacea, or the purple coneflower, has a 4-foot root. So it's pretty hard to get the whole root, but I would try moving them and just see what happens.
And start when they're small.
Yeah.
I've heard people have better success when they're small, like trying to move them maybe in early May or mid-May instead of like now when they're 3 feet tall already.
Yeah, that's true for all plants, I think. Yeah.
I hear a lot about sedges, but what about rushes? I've recently discovered that in my yard, know little of their significance.
Well, they're good for a wet area. If they just popped up there naturally, then you probably have an area where wet loving plants would like to join the rushes. So you could create a little rain garden there. It doesn't have to be wet, like squishy or visible wet, to be an area where wet loving plants like it.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, Sherry says Missouri Wildflower Nursery does not treat plants. That's a new one for me, so I'd have to look at that one. They ship, not sure if they ship out of state. So let's see, where would you recommend looking for information on which herbicides to sparingly use for things like thistle, buckthorn, creeping Charlie, and vinca?
Don't really have an answer to that. I mean, I would look online or just read the labels.
One thing you might try is contact your local forest preserve district or conservation district or some nearby forest preserve district if your local area doesn't have it. Because I guarantee you they are following the best practices for conservation for herbicide use. So if you talk to somebody there and ask them what they recommend using for your particular plant, for example, I had buckthorn in my yard, and so I asked what to use, and they said a 50% glyphosate solution. And the way to do it is you cut it, and then you use a disposable paintbrush and paint that solution on the cut stump. You don't spray it, so you don't have to worry about drift or things like that. Just kind of watch your drips, but just painting it on there after you cut. And I used a similar technique with honeysuckle. Actually, I'm sorry, it wasn't 50% glyphosate on. It was, the 50% glyphosate was for honeysuckle. And I've had great success with that. For buckthorn, it's triclopyr. But same method, you cut and then paint the treated stump. And that keeps it from returning.
And for both of those plants, it is really important to paint the stumps because otherwise you'll have shoots coming back.
Oh yeah, honeysuckle comes back angry. I am going to be doing a presentation.
Stronger than ever.
All right. I am going to be doing a presentation all on invasive species and what to plant instead. That's coming up a week from Monday. So I believe that's the date. So I think it's the 29th maybe. So stay tuned for that if that's a topic that you are interested in. All right. I think we are running over our time here. So once again, if we were not able to get to your question, if you have specific questions about your yard, if you're looking for a local land trust that you can talk to about stuff, please just drop us an email. Nancy's email is on the screen there, or my email is jviebach@theconservationfoundation.org. Any of the emails you got regarding this webinar, like when you registered, will have my email address on it. So please feel free, drop us a line. We're happy to answer any questions you have. And with that, I want to thank Nancy for taking time out of her very busy day to come and talk with us today about design. And great job, Nancy. And we hope to see all of you back again with us next week. So with that,
thanks for attending.
It was fun. Weekend. Bye, everybody.
Bye.